Hello, and welcome to the Raging Ningen Podcast with Mark
and Rich.
Welcome to today's show. Hi, so on today's episode of Raging Ningen Podcast, which is episode 3 if you're watching chronologically, we are joined by a very special guest. His name is Phil McNulty.
What up, everybody? How's it going?
Phil McNulty is an acclaimed comic book artist. I'm sure you've seen his work in either X-Men or Batman, in which we'll go into a few of those and learn some stories and all about Phil. But right now, I just want you guys to sit back, relax, and Rich, get started with the questions. So here we go.
All right, so my first question for you, Phil, is how did you get started as a comic artist, and did you always want to do this with your life?
This was the only thing I ever wanted to do with my life. From the very beginning, I knew I wanted to be a comic book artist. I remember, so my dad collected comic books before I was born. So when I was just a kid, I was just like, I saw Batman, I saw Robin, and Spider-Man was the first thing that always attracted me. So my dad would always tells the stories, no matter how old I am, or no matter how many prints I'm selling, or selling books, or at a convention, he's like, I potty trained this young man with Spider-Man underwear, right? So, and then I was, so at 3 is when I really started to draw. Back, for the viewers who are younger, Captain America wasn't so popular. He wasn't like, he only had Captain America and the Avengers, the video game. Like, that was his height of popularity. But my twin loved Captain America. That's like his go-to. So I had a Spider-Man coloring book, and there was no Captain America one. So I actually ripped out a page of that coloring book, flipped it over, and I drew my own Spider-Man on the back. I said, here you go, Patrick. Here's Spider-Man's twin. You can color that. And,
what was he called?
I think it was just called Spider Twin. I wasn't the creator I was back then that I am now with names. But that was a precursor. I was the original creator of Ben Reilly. Oh man, I'll tell you. To kind of go off the rails, Ben Reilly is the best. He's my favorite Spider-Man. He's cool. Scarlet Spider. Because I remember as a kid, like, my dad was like, here's a Spider-Man comic book. And it was Spider-Man and Mary Jane that had their marital problems. And then, like, Aunt May was just, like, in the hospital dealing with health issues. And I was just like, what? And then I remember Scarlet Spider, and he had the pouches on his ankles. And it was just for money to buy pizza. I was like, wait a second. This is the Spider-Man I can get behind. But I remember it wasn't, like, really till I was, like, 5 when I saw the X-Men animated series. I just remember seeing Gambit. And when he called Jubilee and he did the cards at the Sentinel, and she's like, how'd you do that? And he was like, with star, petit, with star. I was like, I just knew that I wanted to draw that character, like, forever. So drawing comic books was the only, like, career I ever wanted. And I really had no backup plan, so I kind of made that the forefront of everything.
Cool. I actually really enjoyed Ben Reilly as well. I think my favorite part of that whole Clone Saga was probably the twist with Spider-Man number 0, or was it Spectacular or Sensational?
Spectacular
Spider-Man number 0, and like he had that awesome foil cover of him like going towards the camera. I still have it. I got it for Easter one year in my Easter basket. And in that comic, you actually find out that Ben Reilly is not the clone. Ben Reilly is Peter Parker, and the Peter Parker that we thought was Peter Parker was the clone that was inserted there by the Jackal, and my mind was blown.
It's so funny because I remember everyone was just like, that's why they hated the Clone Saga. Like, no, it's Pete. It's Pete. We all know it's Pete. It's comic books. We're supposed to be shocked about that stuff, and we're supposed to be like, wow, could Ben really be it? But as kids, like, because we're close in age, and that was like our sort of introduction to actually reading Spider-Man comics, we were just like, whoa, this guy that I identify with more than Peter is the real Spider-Man? Yeah. And plus he had the frosted tips, and like,
gotta love the frosted tips.
Right, me and my best friend Ryan Brady, we call him Sexy Ben Reilly, because like he was Justin Timberlake before Justin Timberlake. He's the one who brought the blonde frosted tip game to the table.
Plus, when you think about it, he lives the ultimate bachelor lifestyle. He didn't have to get an amicable divorce from his wife. He just left and fucked off to somewhere else and like did his Spider-Man thing. Can bang Black Cat as much as he wants, and no one should notice the difference because he wasn't Peter Parker at the time.
And I mean, what comes around goes around, because now they're actually introducing Ben back as the lead Spider-Man. As I think Pete's going to be in like some coma or some stuff like that, but who knows?
I just like that fresh new spider costume with the giant symbol and like the web shooters on the outside with the half bat black and red. So cool.
So growing up, we couldn't get that Spider-Man costume. You know what I mean? Like if we wanted to be Spider-Man, we couldn't do the whole webbing on the costume, but we could do the Ben Reilly. Just get red footy pajamas, right?
Blue
hoodie, cut off the sleeves, and you were Spider-Man. You couldn't do that with the other one, so he's even just that much more relatable.
It's funny because it's like a cooler outfit, but it's also like more simpler.
Right. Sometimes the devil's in the details, and I think the detail of that is the KISS method. Just keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, exactly. I think it lends more towards the affirmation of like less is more. Even like why Venom and Carnage are so wildly popular is they're literally just like a toothed version of symbiote Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a simple design, but now it's so iconic and, like, known as, like, his best rival and, like, I wouldn't say a villain, but he's, like, one of the strongest antagonists to Parker himself, like, throughout the years. And it's just a darker version of himself. I
had the pleasure to have a conversation with Stan Lee, and I asked him, like, what was the one... Now, I knew the answer to this because I just loved R.I.P. Stan. I just loved any time he answered this question, and I said, what is the one Spider-Man villain that was created that you wish you created, right? That you didn't create but you wish was created. And he always said Venom. He's like, I'll tell you, I love Venom. He's like, it's just so simple to have an evil version that looks like Spider-Man. He goes, and I just thought, damn, I should have thought of that. So, and I think that's a very telling of the longevity of that character, was because, like, if Stan Lee gave that approval of, I wish I created that, then I think it's easier for us to be like, yeah. And you know what made Ben better was that because he never wore the symbiote suit, his spider senses worked against Venom. So there's that one shot of him on the edge of a building, and he's thinking, and he just like pops like Venom in the face because his spider senses went off. And I just thought another way to add how cool Ben is.
I think like Venom is so popular as well because like not only is the symbiote adverse to Spider-Man, but Brock is the adverse to Parker. And then they became so close after like Maximum Carnage and stuff that they kind of became almost one and the same, which was even more better for me. And then they tried to replicate it with like Doppelganger and things of that sort. I don't think it nearly went off as well.
Yeah, they're kind of like spin-offs of the spin-offs, kind of.
Doppelganger is a cool character within Maximum Carnage, but when we had that whole like Secret War-X thing when they had all the doppelgangers, it was nowhere near as cool as like him just being like Carnage's dog.
It's funny because I think because we grew up with people older than us, probably our ages, and we probably thought, oh, that old man. But they're probably our age now that were telling us, no, Maximum Carnage sucks, and no, the Clone Saga, you better read Kraven's Last Hunt, and now we're the crotchety old men telling like the young kids,
you better read Maximum Carnage.
The Clone Saga is where it's at.
Yeah, we have an adverse for that too. Like growing up, like everyone hated GT in like 1996, but then now that Super's out, like 20 years later, us all crotchety old men are like, GT is way better than Super. Like, you need to watch GT, and it's just crazy how things turn around like that.
Yeah, history repeats itself with that kind of thing.
Because I was at a show with Mark Polton. It was me, Ryan Brady, and Mark Polton. We were all sitting at the show, and no one showed up. It's so poorly advertised that the three of us are just sitting there, just like, you know, twiddling our thumbs. And I turned around and said, gentlemen, can I ask you a question? They're like, sure. And I'm like, do you think people will, like, reminisce on X-23 like we reminisce on Ben Reilly? Because we, like, the three of us there didn't give, like, two craps about, like, X-23, but we all love Ben Reilly. And I just think about, in the future, when they're our age, like, they're going to be like, there was this clone of Wolverine, and I'm going to be thinking to myself when I'm in my 60s going, oh my god, like, damn, that was me, and, like, our dads were us.
I think we're already starting to see the beginnings of that with the fame of Miles Morales, because I remember when he first came out, everyone was like, oh, it's just a tokenized version of Spider-Man, blah, 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 and I actually like Miles Morales a lot, but it's also because of, like, we get the dynamics with like the half of it because he's biracial, right? So we get like the Puerto Rican side and the black side, and then we also have his integration with the regular cast of characters. And he's a pretty good Spider-Man who has different power set. He was kind of like similar to Scarlet Spider. He had the Spider Sting. He's got the Venom blasts, right? So it's a little bit similar of a situation with that. Because I think which one of the Spider-Man had the kinetic charge besides him? Is that Spider-Man 2099? Is that Miguel O'Hara?
It is O'Hara.
Okay, yeah.
So I always liked that aspect and made him different from Parker, so it was different enough to be like super into him. So I think that's what led me like down to Miles' path. So I think in the future we are going to be seeing those conversations had. Unfortunately, my favorite Marvel character of all time doesn't get talked about at all. Nobody gives a crap about him, and that's Nate Gray. I'm a huge X-Man fan, and he has always been one of my favorite characters. It's Cable without the techno-organic virus unleashed completely. He freaking created a clone of his mom from his brain and then banged her, and then she became the Dark Phoenix because he couldn't kill her. How insanely powerful is that? Plus, he killed Apocalypse, and nobody cares about him.
You know, it's characters, and I think because they were just so too cool at the time that...
They were too cool to exist.
Right, and I honestly think that because I remember Gambit in the animated series was only part of the X-Men for like 2.5, 3 years, and they were all butthurt, like, Colossus should be there, Nightcrawler should be there, and I'm just like, no, he's representative of the times, like, and before him it was Longshot, so I always like to think, I always do X-Men, Gambit, and Longshot, they're all in the same sentence, because it was like, Longshot started in the 80s, right, and then late 80s and then into the early 90s, and Gambit sort of took that baton. It was like early 90s right to the mid to late 90s, and then X-Men sort of took that baton from him to like the late 90s into the early 2000s, and now I think we sort of, and that sort of, then Grant Morrison came in. Don't even get me started on Grant Morrison's X-Men run, but that's what sort of killed the fun of any new X-Men character, besides losing the rights to, you know, Fox at the time, like to stop the halting of all X-Men. But I like to pinpoint it right at that point when Morrison took over, because that really killed the fun of the X-Men, in my opinion.
Yeah, a lot of the fun seemed to go away with different... But that's what happens with different writers and different teams. Like, you get their variations, and just like life, when like you have to go through the bad to appreciate the good, I appreciate his run because it makes me love the runs that I love that much more. So that's just how I like to try and philosophize it away and try to be like, listen, the hashtag not my X-Men thing is not going to work for me, because if it's your X-Men, I have my X-Men already, and that's not going to change. So,
and the X-Men is for everybody, so I don't think it's one of those things where you can't hate on anyone's X-Men, because I just think it's hilarious that the X-Men always constantly evolve into a new team. And we saw for years where Wolverine wasn't on a team, and then Cyclops turned bad, and then Havoc had to step up. So you always get this sort of rotation. So what comes around will, go around and come back around again. So I think it's funny, you had the original 5, then you had the X-Men, the giant size X-Men team, when you had Warpath on there. Then you had the Claremont and Lee run, and then you had the Morrison run, and now who knows what they're doing now, but my hope is that it sort of gets back to that team and family sort of.
I think the name actually gives villains enough credibility too for like kind of a rehabilitation, because we've seen multiple villains take the helm of X-Men. We've seen Emma Frost in X-Men, and she was a big villain for a while. We've even seen Magneto. That's why I love the Age of Apocalypse so much. You got freaking badass Cyclops with like that long hair, and then like I just love the Age of Apocalypse, but not the movie, but I love the comics. Age of Apocalypse. That's where my boy X-Man is like from. So a lot of that stuff I'm like super into. But yeah, I mean, as we can see here, can you show us what's next to you, by the way?
Oh yeah, sure thing. I was going to say, welcome to the X-Men podcast. So this was my very first published work for one of the big two, as we call them. But this is my X-Men 92 variant cover for issue number 1. So what I did, it was something where I was really feeling myself at the time, like not inappropriately,
with consent.
But yeah, I said yes. So I was actually got done working for Kevin Smith's podcast, and then I ended up going to working for William Shatner's comic book series. So I went from anime. So I always wanted to be a comic book artist, and I got that job just because Kevin Smith was like, Phil, you draw a badass Batman. So I was like, sweet. So I then went on to like William Shatner's comic book series, and then I was like, you know what, my name's getting out there. I'm just gonna bug the crap out of the editors on Twitter. And the one editor saw my message and was like, hey Phil, do you really want to do the cover? Because we know your style. And I was just like, they know me. Sort of like in Jingle All the Way when he sees Turbo Man. He's like, he knows my name, right? You get it. So I was like, yeah, I'd be glad to do it. And I wanted to do a riff on the Night of the Sentinels cover packaging. And so all the characters here are in a position where they were on the VHS that you would get at like Pizza Hut or Toys R Us. And I said, I'm just going to do it in my style, in my poses, and the way I would like to see it. So I ended up doing this, and I mean, it was fitting because this was the one thing I really wanted to do. Was I really wanted to just draw Gambit and have people see my Gambit and say that was a badass Gambit. And ultimately, I was at Camden Comic Con when Chris Claremont. I had him like sign one of my copies, and he was just like, "You draw a badass Gambit," and I felt like that was the ultimate like confirmation that all right, I chose the right career path.
Well, that's good affirmation. I would be super impressed by that.
Yeah, it's like basically the best compliment you can receive.
Yeah, I mean, plus I love comic books, right? And when you try to make comic books more than what they are, you sort of lose the fact that comic books have this message inside of them, and it's up for you to pick it up. And when you try to push that message over the comic itself, you sort of lose what makes the comic the comic.
Yeah, I think that's a good. That's one of my favorite parts about comics. Is like you're going to internalize or reflect everything into the universe that you want to be, positioned as yourself. And I think everybody has been for years doing that. So the fact that like you push like one particular message, you're going to alienate automatically a bunch of people. But if you have the message hidden in such a way that like it reflects everybody's day to day, then everyone's going to pick it up. That's why a lot of people today say like, no, you need to know your demographic and project to a certain demographic. And I say, marketing kind of studies show that like you need to kind of like throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, because people are going to pick up what they pick up and they're going to drop what they drop. They're not going to expect it just because your marketing team says that this is exactly going to fly with today's youth, as they would like to say. I think that that's just like in a wrong direction to go. And we're going to take a look at a bunch of your other comics as we go throughout the podcast. I know Rich has some more questions, so we can move on to them. Just so we don't make this a 15-hour long
X-Men and what kind of comics do you like? Well, don't even get me started. But
you see, it's funny because I wanted to say, I guess your sort of path in the industry is like it's way more straightforward than our last guest, Mark Poland's, because I think I asked him a very similar question. I know he mentioned he kind of made multiple turns and stuff. You kind of were just like comic artist.
Yeah, so it was funny because
he's also a writer, and that's a lot more. It's a lot more competitive of a scene because everyone values himself as a writer because it's just an internal monologue, like reflected on paper of what you think. Everyone thinks their stuff is the best. Everyone thinks that their stories will be awesome. We heard some stuff about yours earlier, like which would be awesome to a lot of people. Some people might think corny, but it's up to the reader to interpret that and design that. But the writers have it hard. A lot of people think that their job's super easy because you just write a script and then like the artist spends painstaking amount of hours to like draw that and bring it to life, but those stories, not only as an inner reflection of what they want to be cool, they are also tasked with projecting the entire story forward. And like a good story is a backbone to good art, because if there's not a good story, the art can be as amazing as it wants to, but nobody's going to care. It's not going to pop off the page per se if it's not going in the direction where somebody's envisioning it to go or wants it to go, or you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's such a hard time to get into comics as a writer per se, because
everybody has to go indie. Like you can't even go to the big two these days. I've all but given up on that, and like any Marvel editors are out there, I am here for work. DC editors, I am here for work, ready, willing, and available, and my page rates are super low, just for you. It's called a friend discount, but it's to get in there. It's very. There's a lot of oligarchy involved and nepotism involved, and even if you're not, it used to be like in a lot of things. It's like if you're the most talented at what you do, you're gonna get given your due process. You're gonna be shown. You could be the most talented person in comics and never work in comics. which is why like I love Kickstarters and Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and like how the self-made market is. And I think the only thing that we need to do now is get up to a point where people accept those books as much as they accept the big two. And if you think that that's a far cry, that's literally what Image Comics did. And that's what Image Comics does to this day. That is creator-owned, published works through Image. So that's just indie comics with a publisher above them. So if you consider there's a big three, then I think indie comics should be respected as much as mainstream comics.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember as a kid, my dream jobs were either Spawn or Wildcats.
Yeah.
And that was neither. It was because it was artists from the big two that sort of said, like Todd McFarlane. I love Todd McFarlane. He's a personal hero of mine. He's one, obviously, my holy trinity is Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, and Rob Liefeld. And those are my holy trinity of artists because that's what I taught myself how to draw with. And it's funny because getting back to your question about how did I get started, it's because when I graduated college, I went on job interviews and for graphic designer because my major's in, even though it's visual communications and my concentration was in illustration.
That's when I went to college. It was graphic communication.
Right.
Yeah.
So I went in there and they're like, and it was for fitness DVDs, and they're like, oh man, like, you should be in comics. I'm like, yeah, but I also don't want to live with my parents for the rest of my life, and I have bills, and I can't answer a phone call if I can't pay for my phone bill. So it was also during the height of the Craigslist killer. You know the Craigslist killer thing?
I remember Craigslist was like really like...
No, there was a specific serial killer that was deemed the Craigslist killer.
No.
Yeah, it was for personal ads and stuff, right?
Right. So I saw an ad, right, that said comic book artists wanted, and I thought, all right, either I'm gonna get murdered or I'm gonna get some work in comics.
That's a gamble.
So
That's a gambit. Yeah, I've been to it.
If I didn't make it in the comics, it's as good as dead anyway. So I figured, why the hell not? So I went in.
Okay, we're gonna do work for T-Mobile.
So the editor of the comic book company was called RZG Comics, and it was originally RZG stood for Red Zone Girls, and it was just like trashy pinup calendars. But the editor who worked on the X-Men in the '90s was part of that company, and he's like, we're rebranding it. I'm like, okay. So I said, all right, here's some of my stuff, and he's like, all right, I want you to draw like Jack Kirby. So I was drawing like, and it was pretty cool, but I'm like, this is not me. This is not my style. I'm 90s. I'm really trying to, put like a square peg in a round hole. Like, it was just not fitting. So I knew that I just had to give it my last shot on this one book because I was like, this company is not for me. So I ended up doing my 90s style, and then Jim Steranko did a cover for it, and it actually sold really well. And my editor said, Phil, why haven't you been drawing like this the whole time? I was like, maybe because you didn't want to see it. But so I worked for that company, and I remember I got my first paycheck from them, and it was for 5 cents. They mailed me a check for 5 cents. I had not cashed it to this day because it's hilarious because I did the stand. This is when you try to break into comics, especially as an artist, you want to go, they never give you a page rate. You have to earn a page rate. You need to sign a contract based off percentage sales. But they would use all those sales to promote their stuff and be like, well, this is what you get left over. So I was not feeling it, and at the same time there was Kevin Smith was doing his Super Groovy movie, which is his first cartoon, which left his company without an animator to do his cartoons that he did, which is called the Smodco Cartoon Show. So he said, I want a 2-minute video of Batman versus Darth Vader. And I said, well, my animation skills aren't the best, but why don't I make it them playing a board game? And then, so I thought, guess who, right? There was no more fun game when I was playing than as a kid was Guess Who, right? And so I had Batman guess who Darth Vader's character was on the first shot because he's the world's greatest detective. So then they insult each other, like Batman uses Star Trek insults just to be glib, and Darth Vader uses Marvel insults just to be glib to Batman, and ultimately ends with Batman losing his cool and like jumping over the table, and that's how it ended. And I just remember I submitted that, and I was just like working on the most busted ass, trashy laptop that, God bless my dad, he got from his work, and was like, you want to use this? Plugged it up to a monitor because the screen didn't work. Had my Wacom tablet. I must have looked like I was like, the calculator from DC Comics. Like, I have all these screens around me just to do this little 2-minute cartoon. And I was just like on the verge of giving up. And my brother's like, no, don't give up. It's good, go do it. Because I was standing in the mirror, like, seeing how mouths were and animating it. So I ended up winning the contest and getting a job. So I was working on the Smodco cartoon show, and at the same time that RZG Comics was bought out by William Shatner and his company called Shatner Singularity. So they were like, hey, so we put artists so my editor gave William Shatner a bunch of artists, and he's like, I want that guy, which was my artwork. So I ended up, at the same time, I was working for Kevin Smith, and then I was working on William Shatner's book, Man of War, at the same time, and I was just like, well, damn, and that's when I thought, okay, I'm now going to shoot my shot, because in comics, especially today's outlets, when you have Instagram, DeviantArt, Twitter, Facebook, all the social media is like...
You think it's more open than ever, but it's more nepotistic than ever because they pretty much ignore all of that stuff unless there's a crowd pushing for an individual thing. Their ears are closed. They're plugged. So it's even more so easy for the editors to be like, well, this guy's my friend. He's going to work on this book. And that's why a lot of the artists kind of suffered over the years because they're not giving the actual artists the ability to work on the books they're supposed to. And this is not even getting into things like Comicsgate, which has further divided the comic pool that is already as niche as it possibly is. Because people often forget, like, this is the source material, but comics are not as popular as, like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is, because that's involving all the normies and people who just want to see cool things happen on screen. Like, we have to deal with the years and years and generations of lore and different teams and, like, trying to live up to those teams and create our own identity as a whole. And people constantly want to compare you to other artists. I used to get compared a lot of times to like a Walmart version of Michael Turner, which was like one of the people I started out following. So I took it as a compliment at the time. But then you were right with that, what you were talking about before, the Jack Kirby stuff, is they don't want you to be you. They want you to be what they want you to be, especially the writers and editors, until there's a big enough outcry for your individual talents. And then they're saying, well, now be you. Where were you this whole time? And it's like, I was here. You just didn't let me be me. Like, that's one of the problems I see with breaking into the industry.
I was fortunate enough to meet with Michael Turner before he passed away. And I was just a kid in high school, and I wanted to know how I could get into the comic book industry. And I straight up asked him, and he said, number one, do not get a DeviantArt page. Do not do it. And I thought, what? Because I was about to start one. He says, immediately when an editor or someone sees your artwork on DeviantArt, they think it's amateur Night and Dixie.
Oh, wow.
Because they think you're not going the proper route to get in. Because how else are you going to get noticed? The internet. But I took that advice, and still to this day. So my advice to anyone who wants to get in comics, do not start a DeviantArt page, because it still looks like amateur Night and Dixie.
I guess I got to delete my DeviantArt.
I'll tell you what, Instagram and Twitter are your main reasons. The reason why I got the X-Men one was because it's a business. They saw how many likes and retweets I got.
And they translate that into money because they translate that directly into sales.
Right.
So that's what I was saying before. You can post all the stuff that you want on Instagram and Twitter, but if you don't have people pushing for you, they're not even looking at you. You could be the next best thing that is going to blow up in a couple of years and blow every artist out of the water that's ever existed. They're going to call you an amateur and think that your stuff looks like dog shit until people tell them that it doesn't look like dog shit. So it's always based on networking, communication, and marketing yourself as well as your art, because you have to make sure that people like you enough to put your stuff out there, which is also the hardest hurdle. I've had a YouTube channel for 4 years. Most of my subscribers don't even know that I draw. And the ones that do don't buy my books when I promote them. And the ones that say that they will, just, you know what I mean? I'll get an occasional retweet, but I'm not seeing the sales go up. And that's on them. I'm not pushing it to them just to do it. I want people to want to read my books, right? And I want to work on a bang out team of people that I want to work with. And that's like the biggest thing for me. And it's just a little bit of a double-edged sword because the editors are like, well, we're the epitome, so you have to aspire to us. But in actuality, they don't exist without us. And I think a lot of that's been forgotten, and the golden age of like artists and writers like working with editors as a team has turned into like us versus them. And it's really, it makes it even harder to get into the industry because that's what leads to them ignoring people on Instagram and Twitter unless they have a following.
I'll tell you what, that's absolutely true, because as soon as Joe Quesada went from X Factor artist to editor-in-chief, he took the characters that he hated, specifically Gambit, who's my favorite character of all time. He's the reason why I draw comics, the reason why I really love comics. It's Gambit, Gambit, Gambit. My girlfriend will tell you, you walk into our living room and I have like a shrine dedicated to Gambit. It's all the action figures I've collected over the years. It's artwork, it's statues, like that is my obsession.
Oh, I've seen it. I've seen his landlord come to his house and he's like, do you have any money? And he's like, do you mean Mon Ami?
It's so funny because that's when they ended Gambit. And I remember I would want to get comic book artists like Salvador Larroca. I want him to sign my Extreme X-Men #8, and Joe Quesada took my book. He had nothing to do with it, but he was the editor-in-chief, and he felt like he should sign it. And I was like, no, right? So there's always been this thing of, if I don't like it, I'm just not going to put it. And that's when the editorship took over the talent itself.
The editors are the runners of the ship now. You can't get anywhere without them or through them. And as much of an outcry against the editors that there is, it doesn't matter. They just push back harder, and they're given the power to do so, which silences the creative half of it, and then you're left with garbage. And when you're left with nothing to edit, and you have to like hire your friends and come up with all this stuff, it's a reason why anime and manga have been outselling like American artwork like well over. It's like we haven't seen an American comic book on the top selling charts in, it seems like forever at this point. It's all like the newest manga. Like now it's Jujutsu Kaisen and Demon Slayer and My Hero Academia. They're all the top slots, and people don't understand there's a reason for that. Like, I mean, there's an onward path that where all this is headed and where it's pointed towards. But the biggest problem is that a lot of these people are still stuck so much in their virtuistic heads that like they don't want to see change happen. They just only want change to happen if it affects them properly. And it's kind of like a little bit of a sociopathic tendency. I'm not calling them sociopaths, but like it's definitely pointing towards like, this is good for me, so I'm going to stick with what I know, than taking chances. And I think comics is all about taking chances. It's all about entertainment. It's all about who the next best thing is. Yeah. We got to remember, I always go back to that Todd McFarlane story, that before he got to do Spider-Man #1, he has over 50 rejection letters from the top 2. Over 50 rejection letters that he kept. And that's Todd McFarlane. Like, we think of him now as like the godfather of like independent comics, and like he created Image and, well, along with a bunch of other people, but a lot of us from like 90s kids grew up like salivating over Todd McFarlane's art, aspiring to Todd McFarlane's art, and they said no. So to me, that's proof in of itself that they don't know what the industry needs. They don't know what they want, and it's not their job to know because they're not the talent. They're not artists. They're not writers. All three of us here are teachers, right? Mm-hmm. And we always hear that adage, those that can't do, teach, which I always hate that adage, but it really fits well in this thing. It's like they want to see comics that they want to see, so therefore they're trying to force it instead of it letting it actually evolve that way naturally, and you're automatically subjugating yourself into a niche and pushing away anybody who's been expecting the status quo for this long. And yes, the status quo does need to be shaken up once in a while, but not in what we're doing now, where we're getting like constant crossover, like multi-series books, like back to back to back to back to back, to where it turns into these giant rewrites every so often, to where you don't even care about the characters anymore because you know they're just going to get turned around and rewritten or rebranded or changed in the next couple of years.
I think to put a nice cap on this part is, we think about this: the creators became more important than the characters, right? And I think Marvel and DC saw that as no. Like, and that's especially with Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane, when Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, Mark Silvestri, like the Valentino, like when they all went in the original Image 7, and they're just like, we're not working for you, and they went to DC, and they said, we're not working for you either. The editor who gave me my start was actually in the room when that happened. Right? Nice. So that's why he didn't want me to draw in my 90s style, because he thought He was having some PTSD flashbacks.
That's where the true crux of this situation comes, because a lot of people think, oh, Comicsgate is stuck in this time period. Comics people who are even that affiliate, because I'm not like part of Comicsgate, but I have a lot of friends who are in Comicsgate, and I'm sure there's a lot of similar situation. I don't look at them in negativity. I think it's just them making their own comics that they want to see, which is what they should have the freedom to do so. But everyone always says, oh, that looks 90s, that looks corny, that's not how things are supposed to look these days.
It's seen as an insult a lot of these days, I notice, which makes me mad.
My best compliment I get is when I'm at shows and I'm selling prints and they're all just like, oh my god, this is like the 90s style. Like, I grew up with this style, right? And then it's funny because, and it's a lot of dads who have their kids, moms who have their kids, and they come over to my table because they're like, this is what I had when I was a kid, right? And then, but their kids gravitate towards it too because they're just like, oh, right? And they don't realize that, yes, the creators became more popular than their characters, but they're, in turn, because of that, Spider-Man and the X-Men were selling millions. If you sell a book that's over 15,000 copies, like in a monthly book that sells 15,000 books a month, they're like, amazing. What a great turnout. But 20 plus years ago, they were selling 1 million copies a month, right? And it's because the creators were becoming superstars, and they in turn were making their characters even better. And I think that's where where the editors, they see that disconnect, and they think, oh, well, we don't want them being bigger than the product. No, because they're bigger than the product, they're making your product bigger.
Well, what's the biggest advertisement that you think would be for comics or geek culture in general?
Oh, man.
I would say a convention.
Definitely.
So when you go to a convention and people pay these door prices and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars like at these places over a course of a weekend, you're going to see the creators. Because there's going to be 15 different artists there, and they all have their own rendition of Spider-Man. You're not going there for Spider-Man. You're going there for their autograph. You're going there for their rendition of Spider-Man. You know what I mean? So, and people turn a blind eye to that, and editors think, no, it's our product that's selling. It's not. Like, it's a product of the environment in which they were drawing, but still.
It comes to your point earlier, which I totally agree with, and what I've said too. So when I was doing this cover, I had the one editor say, hey, Phil, can you go on one of Kevin Smith's podcasts and promote it? And I was just like, what? Like, you're going to me to call in a favor from someone who like Kevin Smith, I've never worked with anyone nicer. He's the absolute man.
First of all, that's the equivalent of going on somebody's stream and promoting your own stream and dropping a link. It's seen as, like, completely uncouth. Nobody's going to take you seriously. You don't do that. If somebody puts up artwork, you say, that's awesome or that's amazing. You don't say, here's my artwork. You know what I mean? Right. And, like, the way they think they can get free promotion out of you while taking advantage of you at the same time is borderline criminal.
It's so funny because I'm like...
They're like, I don't respect you, but other people respect you, so I'm going to get free money and free promotion by using you and putting you up as my totem. It's ridiculous.
And they were owned by Disney. And I'm just like, wait a second.
And the mouse doesn't give a crap about anything.
No, I got a C&D from Disney in college when I was selling Mickey Mouse stickers. I was drawing Disney characters. I got a C. I'm like, how did you find me to get a C&D? Right, same thing. But
isn't the whole point of art you're not supposed to judge it in those terms to begin with?
Right.
It's your own interpretation of your internal struggle put on paper. It's supposed to be an interpretive thing. That's always what it is. And yet we'll go into a modern day art thing and somebody like eats some Taco Bell and does a snot boogie on like a board, and it'll sell for millions and millions and millions of dollars as like the most revolutionary thing since sliced bread. But you put 3 months of work into like a 1 week serialized or released book, and you're criticized from your editors, you're criticized from your writers, you're criticized from the fans, and you're putting all this hours of work into it, and yet you're getting a measly page rate if you're lucky. Mm-hmm. And this is even worse on the indie creator side, because as someone who's done books for indie creators and stuff, that money trickles down to not like, if you see that a book's making like $300,000, those creators are not walking away with $300,000. There's costs involved. Like, you're walking away with like $10,000 each, maybe, if you're lucky. And that's if you're working with a small team. The bigger the team, the smaller the cut. you're doing it for the love of it, and like that also gets a bad rap too. I'm sure we'll just gloss over this because a lot of people say like, oh, like it's a 50-50 chance whether you're going to get your book or not. That's again the same as you're going for your favorite artist. Go to your favorite creator on Indiegogo or whatever, because there are people who like Mark Polton who finish their books before they even start the damn thing. That way you're 100% guaranteed to get it. So I want to cancel that misnomer too, because whenever I see that, I'm always like, oh yeah, you can either read this crap from the big two or take your chances of getting your book for $50 and spending $32. It's just a no-win situation no matter what, and we're on an uphill battle consistently no matter which aisle of the mark you're on. And I'm not saying editors aren't needed, because
they're needed.
They are.
They're needed to do their job. When they want to be creative, that's when it goes downhill. Just make sure there's no misspellings. Make sure I drew a character's costume right, and make sure I didn't add an extra finger, and make sure like, oh, Cyclops needs to appear in this issue because he was in last issue, so it needs to be a different one.
I call it mixeritis. So when you have a band that you go to see and you love the band and you know all their songs, you're going for the front man, you're going for your favorite guitarist, you're going for your favorite bassist. They're the ones that make the music happen, right? And then there's behind the scenes people who they need it and they prod it and they make it into a finalized product, right? When you have the mixer who's there adjusting the audio levels, trying to take creative liberties with the music, you're going to have problems because they don't have the same vision that the artists are coming at it with. And that's the same thing I see the editors there. You're there for a job. You're not a superstar. Nobody's supposed to know your name. You're supposed to be the unsung hero of comics, and that's supposed to be your claim to fame. If you want fame, learn how to draw and go out and create. Learn how to write, go out and create. Learn how to ink, go out and create. Learn how to color, go out and create. You're an editor. Mm-hmm. Do your damn job. Let the other people do their damn jobs and take off the Superman cape. Next question.
Okay. So this one, I think you kind of indirectly already answered, but let's just gloss over it anyway. Who's your favorite superhero overall or from each company? I have an idea who the Marvel one is.
Who's your daddy and what does he
do? So Gambit is my favorite character. I touched on it earlier. It's just that, and I found he's everything that I'm not. Right? He's tall. He's handsome, right? Lady killer, like suave. He's the James Bond of the X-Men.
How tall is Gambit? What is his official?
Gambit is 6'3.5".
Jesus.
Right. I am just barely getting to 6 foot. Right. I'm 5'11.5". Right. Didn't make it to.
That's my exact height.
Right. So I didn't quite make it to 6. And I
say I'm 6 foot. I say I'm 6 foot because we're right there enough. I'm wearing sneakers. I'm 6 foot, so I'm saying it.
Yeah.
But I'm 5'11.5".
Yeah, and like just like knowing that he had insecurities, like, and when things get tough, he makes a joke, and he revealed to Jean Grey like, it's because I need to, right, or else he internalizes it too much, and that's when I really fell in love with the character. Besides looking cool, I now realized this guy has almost everything, and I love that. But he's so insecure about himself, and he needs to make jokes to get out of the situation. So it's definitely Gambit is my top overall. But from each company, for DC, my favorite character is Nightwing. I love Dick Grayson. I love Dick Grayson. But it's because when I was a kid, my dad's favorite character is Batman. He absolutely loves Batman. To this day, when I'm a twin. So when he found out that my mom was pregnant with twins, right, and he's like, I have to sell my collection. So every birthday, every Father's Day, every Christmas, I try to find those classic, borderline Golden Age, Silver Age Batman comics to restore his collection as like a thank you. Because eventually one day I may have to do the same thing.
It's a thing that happens. When I got married, I had... I don't even know how many. I probably had like 20,000, 30,000 books. I had an entire attic that was full of long boxes. Boxes that like I wish I had back, because behind you is my entire collection that I have now. I had like the entire run of Witchblade, Fathom, Darkness, Lady Death, like Vampirella, and then all the big two stuff. And I had a ton of books. And the first thing that goes is the most thing you love. Like when we were getting married, it's like, all right, well, we have no money. We can't get married, like, because even just getting a state wedding, like, they do the paperwork and the filing fees and all that stuff, it's incredulous. Mm-hmm. And then you got to move into a house, and you got to get all that stuff. So we did that the right way, but it came at the cost of my video games, my movies, and my comic books. And I've slowly, every time I go back to a convention, I'll go to a convention to work and make money, but I'll say I got $50 to spend. I'm going to them dollar boxes, and I'm trying to get back a piece of my youth that I lost. And you can do so pretty well with like $50, like in a lot of those long boxes.
Yeah, and so that's why, so my dad just always loved Batman. I thought so I associated my dad as Batman. So I'm like, listen, if my dad's Batman, that means I gotta be Robin, right? And my Robin was always Dick Grayson. And I just love the fact that he became his own man. And it's sort of like a coming-of-age story. Like,
I believe he's the only one that actually... I mean, you can argue Jason Todd,
yeah.
But I believe that he is the most recognizable Robin that's not as Robin. More people know him as Dick Grayson Nightwing than they do as the original Robin.
I guess it's debatable just because I feel like in a lot of like classic like Batman shows and stuff, wasn't Robin Dick?
Tim Drake usually, though. In the animated series, wasn't he Tim Drake?
Like Adam West, though? That was...
So the original...
Season 4, it was Tim Drake.
Yeah, because the animated...
That was the Jim Lee stuff.
Yeah, because the animated series... Robin started out as Dick Grayson.
And then became Nightwing.
I think that was so influential as us because we got to see that. And in the comics, it was just the same thing. Like Marv Wolfman and George Perez are just like, let's go ahead and take him and grow him up. Like, because DC has a rule, and Dan DiDio told me this. You can't age Batman, Superman, or Wonder Woman. You can't age them, right? Because if you age them, everyone else has got to age.
I mean, Batman Beyond proves that should be wrong.
Right.
Yeah. And that old Bruce is best Bruce, man.
Right. Like, I love crotchety old Bruce, and so I'm thinking about Dick Grayson, and they said Nightwing was so, like, amazing at the time that he grew up. Like, he grew up to be Nightwing. Wally West eventually took over the Flash, but he became his own hero. He didn't wear a Batman moniker. He said, this is the character this is who I'm going to be. And I think that's a testament in comics because everyone kind of forgets that they do age and grow up, and he's been the one Robin to transcend Robin.
Not only that, he went so far as to become his own man that, like, he didn't even resemble the old Robin. He has these Cali sticks. Mm-hmm. He's much more martial arts, like striking adjudicated, as well as gymnastics, which he did do as Robin. But, I mean, he's such a striking comparison with the long hair to the short hair. He's almost the exact opposite of what he was as Robin.
The only thing I would say probably has in common with himself as Robin is maybe the mask, and I guess just wearing like the tight spandex, but that's really about it.
That's par for the course.
So requirement.
And then for Image, it's Spawn. It's always gonna be Spawn. I mean, I remember, I picked out a Spawn comic book when I was a kid, and it was Spawn number 4, and Spawn number 4 is when they killed the pedophile.
The Kincaid.
Yes, and I remember my dad looked at it. And was like, okay, we're going to have to save this for later. Like, I just remember. Like,
those were the comics, Spawn, Witchblade, and Lady Death, and The Darkness, where there was a Korean-owned video store that was by my house in, like, where I grew up. And it was just for movies. But they had this one section of, like, all these comics. And they had, like, all of the Image and Top Cow and Wildstorm stuff. And very, very little of, like, Superman and all them. So my dad had this giant water jug full of pennies. So whenever I wasn't allowed to have a book, I would empty that sucker and count out 200 pennies so I can go to the store and pick up the new Spawn or the new Witchblade or anything at. And I had Spawn number 1. I bought Spawn number 1 in that video store. It's not the same Spawn number 1's behind you because, again, like I said, I sold my entire collection, but I sought that sucker back out again.
It's one of the... And, I mean, so, like, I'm in the middle of doing my own creator-owned book. And it spawned when me and Ryan Brady, we were doing a podcast called Neon Nerds, and was just everything 90s comics, right? And
you got to talk about Spawn in that case.
Right, so we did a whole episode dedicated to Image, because he loves Spawn, I love Spawn, right? He loves Youngblood, I love Wildcats, right? So it was just a natural thing to just do, and as both comic artists, we said, let's go ahead and just highlight our favorite artists. And as we were speaking, we talked about how Spawn's look is a combination of Todd McFarlane's favorite characters. It's Spider-Man and Batman combined, right? You take a look at Spawn, Batman's cape, Spider-Man eyes, but he's got Batman's triangle eyes in the big Spider-Man outline. And so you think...
Which was also a progression, because if you've seen his earlier teenage versions of Spawn, it's a completely different character. He looks like Cosmic Spider-Man. Like, it's a far cry from what it turned into. Yeah,
it's very blue and white as opposed to being black and red. And so then
replace those rings with skulls.
Right. So
I mean, even the chains were supposed to be a live allegorical thing to his webbing. So
yeah, because what happened was he was his final run on Spider-Man.
Also, the fact that Spawn's a symbiote is kind of a backstab because he created Venom pretty much, Venom, and he didn't get any credit for it.
No, for years, and he finally just got his credit like about 10 years ago, which is well deserved.
So people say Venom purported like the popularity of symbiotes. I argue Spawn, because Spawn, when he was found out to be a symbiote from hell, everyone wanted symbiotes at that time.
And that's when Carnage came out.
Exactly.
Because
they wanted a darker version of Venom.
Right, and they couldn't do it because Venom was selling so much.
Thank you for watching this podcast. It has moved from the original channel onto my channel permanently. You can also find audio-only versions on Rich's channel, which is named Ragaroth. So thank you again for watching and subscribing and all that good stuff. And I hope to see you again in the next one. And as always, I love it. Thank you, and thank you.